Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Sam.
I'm Billi.
This week, a Channel 9 journalist was stood down after he allegedly accepted $50,000 for being the first TV journalist to call a high-profile businessman McLaren Guy instead of Lambo Guy. Channel 9 have responded saying they are, quote, taking this matter extremely seriously and have stood down the reporter, Cullen. Today, we thought we'd go through a bit more of a media literacy angle with this story. What are the rules and ethics around journalists accepting gifts?
Sam, I think we should start with who Adrien Portelli is, because I've heard a lot about him. I think he buys a lot of houses on the block. And I'm interested in how we got from there, from him buying all of these houses on the block, all the way to here where he is giving $50,000 to a journalist for calling him McLaren Guy. Take us through it. Who is Adrien Portelli?
So this is a guy who has rocketed up the rich list in recent years because of his business. He's got a following of nearly 500,000 on Instagram. And yeah, he's well known for buying properties on the block and then giving them away as prizes. And you can essentially think about his business as kind of a lottery system. So giving away unbelievable amounts of money, or in this case, houses, in exchange for people entering a paid lottery.
And I believe he's actually at the centre of a court case surrounding him allegedly doing an illegal lottery over on Instagram.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a little bit of an ambiguous area in terms of whether the current lottery legal frameworks apply to something like this on social media. But the reason why he's known as the Lambo Guy is because in 2022, he arrived at an auction for the block in a Lamborghini. He's quite an eccentric, very kind of extravagant lifestyle type of guy. Now, last week he posted to his Instagram stories and he said, I'll give $50,000 to the first TV journalist who calls me McLaren Guy, another type of car, and not Lambo Guy. Go for it. Then on Friday, Cullen, who is a sports reporter on Channel 9, he's often on the Today Show, he was doing a live cross from the Australian Open and he said this.
Adrien Portelli, a.k.a. the McLaren Guy, likely to make an appearance
Lambo
here today
Guy,
as well.
Alex.
But look,
it's a different luxury car.
Yeah. No, I think it's pretty sure it's McLaren Guy.
Yeah, no, it's definitely McLaren.
He's probably got both of them.
We can split the 50 grand.
Give him away.
So that happened on live television. Then a couple of hours later, Portelli posted a receipt of a bank transfer of $50,000 to an account with the name Cullen to his Instagram. This was then picked up by other media, the Herald Sun, and by Saturday, so 24 hours after that live cross from the Australian Open, Channel 9 released a statement saying they were taking this matter extremely seriously. We got a further comment from a spokesperson. They said appropriate action has been promptly taken, including arranging for the funds to be returned. While we review the circumstances in which this occurred, Alex has agreed to stand down.
It's such an interesting story, and when we posted it on the Daily Aus 2 days ago, immediately after it happened, it garnered so much attention. Yeah. I think we were even surprised by how many people were interested in this story. And I think today what we want to talk about is the media literacy angle behind this, because it's an interesting area of what is the responsibility or what are the ethics behind a journalist accepting a gift.
Yeah, and I think it led to some really interesting discussions at TDA, and we thought it'd be interesting to share them with you guys. And I think the best place to start is the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, and that's called the MEAA. And that's the largest union for workers in the Australian media and creative industries, and it does include journalists. And basically the job of the MEAA is to look after employees across all media companies. They argue for increases to wages or improved conditions of working. Maybe it's about, what they're entitled to if they're working late at night, for example. They can campaign for changes to laws that might restrict press freedom. And importantly for this story, they promote the practice of high quality journalism, and they do that primarily through their code of ethics.
And that's the main document that we're talking about today, the Code of Ethics. So do you want to take us through that?
Yeah, and it's relatively easy to get your head around this one. I mean, we're used to big, scary PDFs that are hundreds and hundreds of pages. This one is 12 brief dot points. It basically outlines the ethical obligations on journalists, which everyone in the industry should abide to. And the particular clauses that are relevant for this discussion about the ethics of giving gifts to journalists is Clause 4. It says, do not allow personal interest or any belief, commitment, payment, gift, or benefit it to undermine your accuracy, fairness, or independence. Then Clause 5 encourages journalists to disclose any conflicts of interest that could affect or could seem to affect the accuracy, fairness, or independence of your journalism. And also it says to not use your position as a journalist for personal gain. And then finally, Clause 7, it's do your utmost to ensure disclosure of any direct or indirect payment made for interviews, pictures, information, or stories.
And so I guess the key point here is not just that this journalist received the cash payment, but that cash payment allegedly altered the content of his journalism. And that's where there could be a breach in this code of ethics, right?
Yeah, and it's not even, whether it did or it didn't. It's also about whether it seemed to have or not.
Yes.
And that's where the code really puts this extra responsibility on journalists, where it's even not about what actually happened, but what it could look like to the audience. And it goes back to this idea of how important trust is in media and how much trust Australians have lost, or in fact, people all around the world have lost in news.
This is feeling very meta. We're journalists talking about journalists.
Well, it's who better to explain this idea than the people in the industry?
So I want to go back to this document because one thing that's interesting about it is that it exists, but in terms of it being a legally binding agreement of sorts, it's not exactly that.
Yeah, it's different to something like a medical code of ethics or the code of ethics that lawyers or accountants have to abide by, which is it's mandatory for them to be signing on to that to work in the industry.
So those are enshrined in the law of Australia, whereas this code of ethics for journalists isn't.
Exactly. And it might not be that much of a straight line between you break the code, then you're breaking the law. It might be you break the code, that means you're not registered. And if you're not registered, you're breaking the law. But in this case...
if you're not registered and practicing.
Exactly.
And still practicing.
Yeah. If you're a doctor, you need a doctor's license to register. You might lose that medical license if you break a code of ethics. But for the MEAA members, they're bound by the code. The MEAA says that you can investigate breaches. And it tends to be pretty clear-cut if somebody goes on TV and they're racist or they say hate speech, because there are federal laws and state laws that govern that. But for things like benefiting financially from a story or receiving a gift in exchange for content, it's not actually illegal. So it all comes down to how the MEAA actually enforces this. One other thing to mention before we jump into what the consequences within the MEAA actually can be is that there's a lot of leeway given for disclosures. So it's not saying that media companies or individuals can't accept gifts. It's more just about how they're communicating that to the audience. And that's why you see things at the bottom of articles that say might review a flight or might review a holiday, where it says this writer was a guest of the cruise liner or whatever. And that's the disclosure element that satisfies that ethical question. But if you don't do that, then you can be investigated by the MEAA, and they do have some consequences. You can get a warning, a reprimand, a fine that's capped at $1,000, or a suspension or expulsion from the body. But unlike that medical example we talked about, there are no consequences that relate to whether a journalist is in the MEAA or not. You can still practice as a journalist even if you're not a member. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that there aren't really major consequences from a union standpoint for this kind of behaviour in media.
And also, not every journalist is a member of the MEAA and therefore obliged to follow their code of ethics, right?
Certainly. And that's also an interesting point. We don't even know if Alex Cullen is part of the MEAA or not. But it's not even that important when you consider the 9 code of ethics, which is available online. His employer, like many, many employers, in fact, I'd say probably most employers, have codes of conduct which includes rules around ethical behaviour. And that is the substance of the internal investigation at 9, rather than a breach of a code that governs the industry.
So this is an ongoing investigation. We haven't actually heard from Alex Cullen. Do you want to give us a sense of some of the other views that are around?
Hi there, my name's Emma. I'm the editor at the Daily Aus. Just popping in to say hi and let you know that here at the Daily Aus, we are an independent media company who work to break down the news for young Aussies in a digestible and accessible way. If you like what you're watching and you like what we do, please hit the subscribe button. Now back to the video.
Sure. So, this story has been reported by most media, and in social media comments, and in the way that those are being summarized, it's important to note that many are providing an opposing view that this was an error of judgment from Cullen. It was relatively naive and innocent, and it's not a sackable offence. It's again worth mentioning this is an ongoing investigation, and Cullen hasn't commented just yet.
Also important to note that Channel 9 says that the funds have been returned.
Yeah, and I think, Alex Cullen has been the way into us discussing this story today, but this is not the first time that a journalist has accepted what essentially was a prize or a gift or something that they have broadcast. It happens all the time.
Yeah, it's a really interesting discussion also about the ethics around the PR industry because, even at the Daily Aus, we receive gifts all the time from PR agencies. And then it is up to us that if we are ever to talk about a product that we have received as a gift, that we disclose that and are transparent about that. But this is another kind of issue within that area that is a bit grey, but I guess it's up to us to not make it grey at all.
And I think the thing that people are finding a bit more complex about this story is that this is not a matter of $50,000 turning up in a gift box at this journalist's desk. This was a call out on social media with an offering of a prize, and he seems to have been the one to respond to it first. And that feels very different to, declaring that you got paid to go on a holiday that you're now reviewing. I know I've said this a couple of times, but I just want to say it again. This is an ongoing investigation. We haven't heard from Alex Cullen just yet.
And this all comes in what has been quite a tough week for Nine. They have been in the headlines, I'm sure, much more than they would like this week. Tell us about that.
Well, we had a moment where we realized we had two pieces about two different Nine personalities next to each other on our Instagram grid. So they've had another saga that they've been dealing with over another sports journalist, Tony Jones, who was accused of being rude to Serbian fans of tennis player Novak Djokovic. Djokovic responded to that by refusing to do the traditional interview with the network after his match on Sunday night. He then expressed his disappointment in the network at the post-match conference. Jones has since apologized for those comments, and it seems that Novak Djokovic is back to doing interviews with Nine. They've also settled a sexual discrimination claim in the federal court with an employee. So for Nine, I think it's more of a week they would rather forget.
Sam, thank you so much for taking us through it today.
Thanks, Billi.
And thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Daily Aus. As always, we very much appreciate you listening to us and supporting us. We'll be back again this afternoon with your afternoon headlines. But until then, have a great day.